Hey there, welcome to the Alive and Well podcast. My name is Chris, and I'm here to help you create long-lasting transformation from the inside out as I connect with people who want the same for us. My guest today is Justin Barnett. He's a pastor at City on a Hill Church in Lakeland, Florida.
As a father, I'm encouraging my children to engage community as a servant as opposed to engaging community as a consumer.
And in this conversation, we talk a lot about community. I believe community is important to our health and wellness. And we discuss how being a part of a community, or at least a good community, matters.
So it goes back to the idea of a true community has to have some sort of shared values and some shared identity there. And I'm sure smarter people have defined it much better than me. But one of those things is the value aspect of we're all joining together under this umbrella, whatever it might be. And there's power there, good or bad, there's power there. And what is true and what is false. Those things are obviously going to shape the community, and they're going to provide boundaries and guidance. They're going to provide that accountability, because I can't hold you accountable if there's not a standard that we all agree on.
Right. What that community might look like, what are its values, how culture has shaped and dictated certain communities, and how we've all fallen to maybe a community that is probably not the best for us, and we really need to reevaluate that. This podcast is meant to be intentional for you to think about your community and what you're a part of, and if it's right for you or not. All these things will lead to better health so that you can say that you are one step closer to being alive and well. I want to take a minute just to ask you to share, subscribe, like. I've been putting content now on YouTube, Spotify. I've been adding clips on Instagram. Take a minute to share it with people that may be intrigued or would like these conversations. My goal with this podcast is to be intentional. There's a million podcasts out there. People talk about a lot of random stuff. I'm here to try to add value to your life so that by listening today, you can be better tomorrow. And then you're one step closer to saying you are truly alive and well. Before we get started, I always like to dive into a person's background. One of the things I've been learning is based on how we grew up, our family dynamics, things like that, it really shapes how we look at the world when we're older. And so I just like to know, and the audience would like to know, what was young Justin like? What was his life like?
Wow.
Can you give us a little bit of a understanding of how your relationship with your parents were as well?
Kind of like a synopsis. Young Justin, I grew up in a predominantly Christian home. My dad was a youth pastor, and so we grew up going to church and grew up, everything was cool. Christmas was fantastic. I was the youngest of 3 kids. And so we were like American white picket fence. And then when I was 8, my mom and dad got a divorce, and that just changed everything. Massive trajectory change. My dad left the church, not his faith, but had to leave our church, where he was the pastor. We stayed at the church. And I'm thankful for that, but the transition there. So young Justin, up until that point, man, I was pretty solid, and then got into middle school, and I completely rebelled against my faith, against the church, and started living a double life, and thinking I was fooling people. But I desperately wanted to be liked. I desperately wanted to be popular. That drove most of my teenage years. And I was, in my mind, I was by far one of the coolest people that I'd ever met. I don't know if my parents agreed with me. As a matter of fact, they probably disagreed with me, having to put up with me. So that was, but young Justin, in all honesty, I've worked with young people. I can't really complain a lot. Went through a divorce. That was tough. But the truth of the matter is, my mom and then my mom remarried, amazing stepdad, kept the family together. And so I look at my upbringing, and I don't have a lot of complaints. I grew up here in Lakeland, tried to get out of Lakeland, but Lakeland has a way of sucking people back into it. Everyone's got a goal. Like, we're getting out of Lakeland, but now I'm here. I'm raising my family here, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. But yeah, this was my hometown, and did my best to get out, but I couldn't escape the pool.
So growing up, and you talked about the divorce that happened in your parents' lives. Did that kind of shape your thought process in that time?
I think that's interesting, because that's a question I'm reflecting on, is how during that time, you responding to people in community and groups. And so for me in that time, probably not having my dad around And my stepdad was there, but the relationship was different. But not having my dad around, I realized there was some input he could have given me specifically about how I engage community. And I think that as a father, I'm encouraging my children to engage community as a servant, as opposed to engaging community as a consumer. Okay. And so, not that people didn't teach me that, not that the Bible didn't, but for me, it was that community became a place for me to build my own identity. It became a place for me to get affirmation. And some of that's just immaturity, right? Some of that's how teenagers engage community. And then you hopefully grow up out of that, where community is no longer a place where you come into a place of maturity where instead of coming into community going, what can I get? There's that place of maturity where you go, okay, I'm here at this community, but it's about what I can give. Yeah. So I can't say the divorce necessarily changed that. I have teenagers and I'd love to say they're selfless lovers of Christ who come in and wash dishes and serve the kid. They're not. They're just selfish, little vipers, man. I love them, and God's going to get a hold of them. But right now, that's where they're at, and I can remember being there. So that was my. I can't say how the divorce. If it was, I'll tell you this: the divorce and the instability. My mom keeping us in the church. And still being like, hey, we're not going to leave this church, and having my friends and my family and those people. Looking back at the time, I didn't realize it, but that church family gave me an incredible stability in a time when home life wasn't crazy, but it was definitely changing for me. And so having a place to go to every Sunday morning and every Sunday night and Wednesday night midweek and those kinds of things, and having that consistency in my life when things were changing a lot at home, looking back on it going, wow, that really provided that was a great foundation for me. Yeah. And I'm thankful that my mom, in spite of everything, stayed at our church, stayed with our community and kept us there. So yeah, looking back on it, that no doubt that helped me navigate, having that to come back to helped me navigate that.
Gotcha. One of the things that you had said earlier was being in a community that you're not a consumer, but you're a servant. Do you think that, first off, can you give us like an example of what that kind of looks like? And then the second part of that question is like, do you think that just is an age thing? That as you get older, you become more a servant, or you have a different perspective of life?
I don't think it's an age thing as much as it's a maturity thing. Okay. And just sitting with a teacher this week who was talking about, asking us what is maturity. And in essence, maturity is just very simple. It's moving from a place of selfishness to a place of selflessness. So that's not an age thing, because you can meet people who you've as much as we knock on teenagers, I've met teenagers who are incredibly mature because of their willingness to serve and be selfless. And I've met people who've been sitting in pews, or just people that I interact with, and they're in their 50s and 60s. And guess what? Their entire life is about them. Yeah. And so they're old and they've aged, but they have not matured because of, so no, I don't. It's definitely an age thing for teenagers to learn that. Yeah. But some people grow out of it, and then some people, I think some people curate it better than others as they get older. But yeah, I think engaging with community as a consumer versus a servant, it's definitely something that is changing and has to change in your heart. Yeah. And just that maturity aspect of maturing out of that.
Do you think that, this is like off topic, but do you think that the American church today is too much of a consumerism kind of mentality?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think we've, yeah. I mean, anybody who looks at it can look at that. And when you compare the American church and how we treat people like they're customers, and Jesus didn't, he didn't treat people like they were customers.
That's good.
He treated people like they were disciples, and that's what he was looking for. And that's why Jesus was so willing to say really hard things to people, because you don't say hard things to people you want to come back into your building, right? If you want them to come back, if I run a coffee shop and I want you to come back, I'm not going to, you walk in and have a bad attitude. I'm not going to be like, hey man, you need to change that attitude. Your life's going to fall apart. I'm like, hey man, I'm just trying to sell you coffee. Yeah. But with us, as we're called to disciple and share the gospel, people come in and we have to say hard things. When we take on that consumer mindset, we begin to avoid those conversations. I was talking with a friend, we were talking about that, and even the conversation that Jesus has with Peter, right? Peter's saying crazy stuff, and he looks at Peter, and what does he say? He doesn't say, hey, Peter, tone it down a little bit. It's he looks at Peter, he goes, get behind me, Satan. Yeah. I mean, and that's his boy. That's Jesus' friend, but he's willing to say this because he really loves Peter.
Yeah.
And he wants Peter to know, hey, you're being driven by things that are dark and destructive. You're not being driven by the light. And so Jesus is willing to say, so yeah, you can see that in America. Our concern is, hey, how many people do we get to show up? How big is the building? How big is the ministry? Jesus was never worried about that.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, he said stuff all the time that cut his crowds in half,
Do you think in the theme of community, so Jesus has this approach where he says hard things to people, do you think that we should be trying to implement that more into our community? Can that help build a good community, or is that something that is lost and we can't really do that today? No,
I think, well, the issue is, do you want real community or do you want fake community?
Yeah.
And I think we're great at building fake community, right? I think that's where social media and the internet and these places, they build this fake community, because the people that affirm your beliefs or affirm your lifestyle, you can continue to lean in, and the people that don't, man, I can literally just block you.
Yeah.
I can literally just like cut you out of that community. If you're involved in a community of believers or your neighborhood, just because I don't agree with you, I still got to go home and you're still living next to me. In my family, in my home, we're going to have to learn how to handle disagreements. We're going to have to learn how to forgive one another. We're going to have to learn how to say, hey, I screwed that up. Will you forgive me? So the question is if you say, I want a community, but I want no correction, then you don't want real community. All right. Real community requires correction. When you look at family structures, when you look at cities, when you look at states, when you look at countries that work, there's accountability and correction.
Yeah.
Right. If you show me a place where there's no accountability and correction, then I'll show you a place run by middle schoolers who are like, this is awesome, we want to do what we want, but that's not a community.
Yeah. When I was looking up just the definition of community, it says it's a group of people living in the same place, having a particular characteristic in common, or feeling a fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. And I think that's okay. Obviously, you want to have people that are somewhat like-minded, but I think we are so far away from having people that have just differing opinions or
right.
people that are maybe a little smarter than us or that just do something different. And why do you think that we should engage ourselves with opposite-minded or different kind of ideologies? Why does that help a community? What do you think?
Well, I think by your definition, there is first of all, a community is based on, okay, there's some values that we all agree on, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to have that. You can't just say, hey, I don't want to use two like crazy groups, but you can't have a community that says, hey, I know you're a white supremacist and I know you're a person of color. We're going to put you together and you got to be in community. Well, no, we have to share some common values here. Okay. Yeah. And there are some values that this particular group over here shares. I can't come under.
Right.
So I think that's the beginning point of community. And then within that, you're going to have people that even with that common set of values, and the church is a great example. We share a common set of values of what we believe about the Bible, what we believe about Jesus Christ, salvation, sin. But even within that, there will be disagreements, and people are going to people. That's it. People are going to people, and they're going to do foolish stuff. They're going to do selfish stuff. And that's the moment where, okay, are we going to invite correction and be okay with that? Or are we going to just default, hey, only God can judge me? Yeah. I think community starts with that foundation of, I'm not saying that's wrong, but even within, there's layers there of, hey, we agree with this. And many times it's the things we agree on that will bring division in the community because someone will begin to act in a way that does not align with our agreed upon values.
Yeah.
And that happens in the church. And Paul talked about that in 1 Corinthians about a particular man who was living in such a way that was not, and he told them, he said, hey, this person, if they're not wanting to repent, cast them out. So yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. But with that said, but I think that harms people. And I've seen that especially with and I'm not but I think within this upcoming generation and my generation, and you know what, I won't make it a generational thing because I don't know anyone who gets corrected and somebody looks at them and says, hey, what you're doing is wrong or what you're doing is unhealthy. And we go, man, thank you so much. I just really appreciate that. That was bottom line is if we're doing what we think is right or even moving or we're responding and someone lovingly comes to us and corrects us, the truth is that there's a reason in Scripture it commands us, hey, a wise man loves correction. don't be a fool. But we're all tempted to.
Yeah, one thing I've been learning about myself, in every job that I've had, I always thought that I took criticism and accountability well. And people would say that to me, like my managers or bosses or whatever. And then recently I've been like more irritated by accountability and criticism. Although I will tell people that I take criticism, tell me how to get better.
Right.
And I've been trying to figure that out, because as much as I want to get better and I want to be a part of this community and build it and whatever, the thought that somebody always kind of like checking you has been like messing with me.
Right.
But then you're saying that it's healthy that somebody keeps you accountable and checks you. Maybe not 24/7, but just that idea, because as people, we want to grow and be healthier and be better than yesterday, right? And so, I really do fall under, agree with what you're saying.
Can I just give one scripture there? A friend of mine always reminds me, and it's really good, but it says, wounds from a friend are better than flattery from an enemy. And I think that in order to have real community, you have to have that relationship, but you have to be willing to sometimes wound each other, not intentionally, but with the truth, but the word says, like, hey, these hurt, they're wounds, right? If something causes a wound, it's painful, but I want you to begin to see that as it's a good thing, that rebuke or that correction or that accountability stepping in. This is only going to make me better. And we just all struggle with that, man. We don't want to, I'm doing everything right. Usually it's the people around me that are screwing it up. So,
as you said something earlier about, we don't want to make it a generational thing, because everybody kind of struggles with that kind of like accountability or community. One of the things I was looking up this week was, there's a program or a school that does kindergartners, and they have elderly people as well, and they come together and they do like school together. So the kindergartners learn, but the elderly people who it's like a assisted living facility, but they are together with young children, and they learn together, and they build this community of young and old. The reason I asked that is because you've stepped into a church role that maybe, if I'm not mistaken, is a little bit of an older population. And how do you being a little bit on the younger side, I guess, from the previous pastor, what is your thought on trying to build community with an older generation, when you have so many thoughts and ideas and creativity, and you want to just like change the world maybe mentality? How do you merge those two together? Because that school thing was kind of interesting, where they just put old people with young people, and they're like thriving. Right. So how does that look in your world, man?
Right, and there's so much there. I'm going to try to, first of all, me and my wife have realized, okay, there's a reason people don't do it, because it's hard. Because you're taking generations. So number one, people don't do it because it's really difficult. And number two, unfortunately, my generation, we have been terrible at honoring those who come before us. We're just bad at that. We especially, you know what? I won't say that across the board. I'll say that in me as an American, we are bad at that. We've been taught when your parents get to a certain age, you find a home, you put them away in a home, and then you move on with your life. Scripture tells us to honor your mother and father, right? That's what Scripture says. In James, it says, hey, young men, do not correct an old man harshly. And it talks about, and all throughout the Old Testament, New Testament, what are you going to find? You're going to find this constant command of, hey, you need to honor those who've gone before you instead of dismissing them, because you dismiss them at your own peril. And also, it's a relationship where they're learning from this generation, and we have so much to learn from them. But if we make ourselves enemies, if we treat each other, and that's what we've done, that's what I've seen. The older people look at the young people and go, oh, they don't care about this, and they don't know how to work hard, and da-da-da. And the media narrative encourages that. And then the young people are like, oh, they don't want to move forward, and they don't have any vision, and da-da-da. And so we create these divisions, and what do? We split off, and you walk into a church, and either everybody there is, collecting Social Security, or you walk into a church, and it's like, there's so much hair gel in the place, you don't know what to do. So and it's you need that balance. And I really believe that, I just see it in other cultures. I was talking to someone who was from India, and he was just talking about how, because of the economy, but also that idea of honoring, we don't just put our parents in homes. And he said it's starting to happen in India because of the change in the economy and people becoming more individualistic. He said, but you'd have this community where when you look at scripture, what do you have? You have the grandfathers coming in, even as early as Jacob blessing his children. He comes in and he says, okay, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to speak this over you. Man, we've just started kind of ripping that apart, and we're losing something. So I definitely think community, and I say this to you, younger generation, it requires people who have experienced things and been places that you haven't.
Yeah.
But when I was in my 20s, I remember looking at my parents and being like, oh, you guys are idiots. You guys just don't have the wisdom. Right. And now I'm in my 40s, and I'm just like, okay, my parents weren't perfect, but they were a lot wiser than I thought. But so yeah, I think we need to recapture that. I love that idea of the older people and the younger people, and I think we need to be intentional and make that normal. We've separated everyone into silos and been like, okay, this is your little community and this is your youth group and this is as opposed to encouraging and go, no, you need to be engaging with these people because they have wisdom to give you, and it requires intentionality, and it's really hard. But it's worth it. I know for us, we've seen that.
Yeah. Intentionality is key. This is a story that I just want to share. You're talking about Indian people and like how they try to build that family generational. It's like an interdependence.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I saw this in my family's life, and this is a shout out to my parents and my uncle and his family, that when my grandmother was getting older, she was in her 90s, and my dad and my uncle said she'll never go to a nursing home, and she had COPD, she had frailty, everything that was wrong with her. She had back pain, like she couldn't really do much. Yeah, and they told her, like, the hospice people and doctors would always say, just take her to a nursing home. Right. She's not gonna do well much longer. My parents said no. Yeah, this was like when she was in her late or maybe middle 80s. Yeah. And so she stayed with us, or she stayed with my uncle, and more of the time she stayed with my parents. And I saw how 3 generations, and when my brother would bring his kid, 4 generations would be in a house, and we would all like just be together. And my grandmother lived way past the time that they all expected it, because she was around a group of people that loved her. Yep. My dad and my uncle did everything they could to bring her to church and to do things that would engage her mind and things like that. Versus and I'm not hating on ALFs and all that stuff, because there's a place for them.
There is a place for it. Yeah.
But I just don't, as I work as a therapist and I go to these facilities, I see that there is definitely a degrade of their health. Yes. And so like if we had done that for my grandmother, it would have been probably 2 years or so. She was able to live to 91.
Wow.
And, yeah. And
that's wild.
It was pretty awesome. And so awesome. I definitely have been more of a preacher of the interdependence, which is a big mind shift change for me, because I was a lot of independence. I still fall into that bucket because I think the American culture and the Indian culture in my mind are just
we got you. Fighting. America got you, bro. we got. But it's so true. I love that.
So one of the things that I also found really interesting was, and I know you're a news guy too, so you've heard of blue zones?
Actually, I have not.
No.
Yeah, what are blue zones?
So blue zones are these areas, these pockets around the world that people live to 100 years old.
Okay, all right.
And so they study them. There's a Netflix documentary on it and stuff. But they study them and they figure out, why do people live this long? Whether it's nutrition, whether it's staying active, whether it's other factors. And one of the things that I saw was community and faith were a big one. Yep. And so I just want to touch on your thoughts, because there's a population in Loma Linda, California, one of the longest living populations. They're Seventh-day Adventists, and they talk about being together in community and having faith together. So what do you think? Do you think there's a high correlation, or what's your thoughts on living in a faith-based community versus just living with a community that's not in that kind of space?
I think it goes back to how you define community, because I think we go, community, that means the neighborhood I live in, but that's not necessarily true, especially in our westernized view of community, because you can have neighbors and never talk to them, never engage them. I can remember being I was in Europe and Spain, and the houses are just on top of one another, and literally your yard is, I don't know, it's maybe it's tiny. It's a little box. The next box is right to you. And I asked, the guy I was staying with, his neighbor came out. They did their dog. They didn't even look at each other. And so that's, you're living next to one another, but it's not a community. So it goes back to the idea of a true community has to have some sort of shared values and some shared identity there. And I'm sure smarter people have defined it much better than me. But one of those things is the value aspect of we're all joining together under this umbrella, whatever it might be. And there's power there, good or bad. There's power there. And so when it comes to a belief in a higher power, when it comes to more importantly for me, a belief in what is true and what is false. Those things are obviously going to shape the community, and they're going to provide boundaries and guidance. They're going to provide that accountability, because I can't hold you accountable if there's not a standard that we all agree on. Right? I come in and be like, you shouldn't lie. I'm like, well, I don't believe in that. It's like, whatever, I'll lie to anybody. Okay, well, that's going to be a very dysfunctional community. We all have to come to an agreement. Okay, within a religious community, we say, okay, there is a God. He has spoken. He's given us truth. And when we live by this, we are blessed, right? When I don't cheat on my wife, it's incredible for the community, for my family, for myself, for my wife, obviously. But those things have to be agreed upon. And so if you just dump a bunch of people with all kinds of different ideologies and go, well, we're a community, you're not. You're a gaggle of people who happen to come together, but you're not a true community. So the greatest default that humanity can have is not a community that agrees on ideas together, but a community that agrees that, hey, we've been given ideas that are not our own, and they're true, and they've been given to us by God, and we're all going to come together and agree that, hey, this is, my favorite line out of, I'm going to quote Mandalorian, even though the show kind of went off the rails, but the first season was amazing. You should watch it. But he says, right, this is the way. Yeah, I love that line. It was like, this is the way. And and every time something would come up and it was hard and it was difficult, what would this is the way. Like, hey man, this is the way that we've all agreed on. This is true. This is right. We're going to move in this way. That's powerful. That's powerful when your marriage is struggling. That's powerful when you're trying to raise kids. That's powerful when you're in college and trying to figure out, okay, where do I go? You have that default community that doesn't say you're going to do A, B, and C, but you can look at it and go, okay, this is how God's built me. These are the gifts he's given me. The people in my community have come to me and said, hey, Chris, man, I really see this in your life. I see this spiritual gift or this ability. It helps me make decisions about my life. But all of that comes from, we all agree that there's ideas greater than us just sitting in a room going, well, we think this is good, or we think this idea or this law. No, we've been given these laws. We've been given this because God intends to bless us. He's put it in Scripture, and we agree on it. You have to have something like that. And every community that functions or accomplishes anything, has something like that. It's their doctrine, it's their set of beliefs. They're all agreeing on it. I think the most destructive, and I'm sure there's more, but I mean the one that the Nazi Party, right? I mean, they had a doctrine. They had a Führer. They had someone, right? They had, this is the way. This is who we are. This is our identity. I mean, it was a terrible community. They accomplished a lot, awful things. But that's the power of community. And that's the even more important thing is, okay, what is the ideology of your community? Because that ideology is going to lead you to a particular place. Right. So you need to go, okay, what is our doctrine? What do we believe in? And that's why when I look at Scripture and Jesus Christ, I go, well, can you find a better doctrine and a better person to follow to say, hey, our community is going to be led by him? So.
Before we continue, I want to plug the GoFundMe below. We're raising money to build water wells in India and other places of the world. This is for small villages, rural areas that don't get adequate drinking water or clean drinking water. They don't have a neighborhood dollar store or Walmart that they can just pop by and grab some bottled water. So we've been doing this, and it's been successful the last couple times we've done it. And it doesn't take a lot of money. $500 is pretty much all we need, and we can build at least one or feed a couple families with that money. So can you help us reach our goal of building 3 water wells this year? That means $1,500 total. And so with your generosity today, someone or a group of people today can say they are alive and well. Thanks.
I want to get a little more personal with you and your story. You had not recently, how long has it been since you moved to that house?
Coming up on this March of 2025 will be 5 years.
5 years, okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of remember vaguely when you moved over there, and one of the things that I heard a lot was, hey, you're moving into an area that's not so highly looked upon, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe the socioeconomic status is not a high one there.
Mhm.
And I think I'm quoting you correctly, but you said you're moving there for a purpose to help
Yeah.
the community there and
Yeah.
to build. And can you tell us about that story a little bit and some of the struggles and some of the triumphs and the struggles trying to be a part of that community?
Yeah, we moved our family. Me and my wife did youth ministry here at City on a Hill, which was formerly Trinity Life, and all of our kids came from this community. And so we were ministering to kids who were their parents didn't know anything. My kids, they didn't know anything about the Bible. I would get them and be like, "You guys, okay, everyone knows the story of Samson, right?" And they're just looking at me like, "Dude, what is wrong with you? We don't know who's Samson." So we were dealing with that and dealing with first generation believers, first generation young people who are just hearing about Christ for the first time and coming from really broken areas and areas that I will say the church has neglected. And even society, you just have places in the city that just get forgotten. And the truth is, the darker they get, the more avoided they become. And so the people who could come in and help, they kind of avoid those places. So we always had it on our heart, and we didn't know, it would be awesome to move into the neighborhood that we minister in. So 5 years ago, right in the middle of COVID, we built a house there, moved in. And the community, if I can just be totally blunt, I'm not big on all the division of it. The community is predominantly an African American community. We are the whitest family you'll ever meet, and we move in with at the time we had 4 kids, and now we have a 5th, Titus. And we move in, and down on the corner, there's drugs being sold. We were blessed to have an incredible ministry across the street called the Dream Center, which made the assimilation a lot easier because of all the ministry being done. Mm-hmm. So that's a caveat. But yeah, we move in, we're completely different, and people are looking at us, and I had multiple people go, "Why did you move here? We built a beautiful home there, right in the middle of the neighborhood. Why did you build this home here?" Mm-hmm. And all that boils down to is again, it's not a call for every Christian to uproot and go drop yourself into a kind of a neglected neighborhood. And sometimes you think, I'm going to go to the neighborhood and I'm going to make a difference. And God goes, "No, you're going to go to this neighborhood and I'm going to continue to make a difference in your heart. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to show you some things there that you don't see." And really, yeah, that's what it's been. We've worked with the Dream Center. My kids have been in that neighborhood, and people are always, and what you also find is that with people and neighborhoods and communities, it's always, if you're sitting watching it on the news, you always have this terrible, when you're in the middle of it, you go, okay, it's not great. It's not perfect, but okay, it's not that bad. It's not as these people, and I've just met some incredible people, and my neighbor, Miss King, is an incredible woman and just loves God and takes care of her brother. And just some amazing people. And it hasn't been easy. The assimilation's not easy. But we moved there for the intensive purpose of all what happens is these neighborhoods kind of fall apart. And what happens is over the years, all the good families move out. And we just felt like God, not that we're this great family, but God said, "Hey, go be a light and go live there." And it's not anything spectacular. It's what missionaries have done for thousands of years. Right. They leave their place of comfort and they go and they drop themselves in. And it's so funny because you can find uncomfortable places 10 miles down the road. Right? And we always gravitate toward, and so literally it's not like I didn't have to go to Bangladesh. I can go to 5th Street and go, man, I know I don't fit in. I know at times I don't even speak the same language or have the understanding. And so we've been there for 5 years, really just trying to be as intentional as we can, raising our family, loving people, and prayerfully inspiring others to say, hey, we can do the same. We can do that. So. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Do you share a story about like a moment where you're like, man, we're in the right community?
Yeah. Honestly, it's weird because I would think that this would have something to do with this would be the spiritual story of where, oh man, I encountered this guy and I pray. It isn't. It's really every time my kids go, hey, Dad, can I go across the street and serve at the Dream Center?
Yeah.
And they're serving with the homeless, and they're serving with people who have addictions, and they're serving with people who don't love Christ, and they're just there for food, and they'll let you know it. And they're loving those people and serving those people. And when my kids go over and they see that, and for me, I'm like, yeah, we're in the right community. Dang. And then they come home, and for me, it's so much about what my kids are learning about comfort and about where you can flourish and where you can experience joy. And it's no longer connected to living on the right cul-de-sac in the right house. All of a sudden, it really becomes about, wow, we have our family here. We have our relationship with God. We have an incredible church family. We can come back to this neighborhood and continue to be light, continue to serve, making incredible connections with others, but not just connecting with them over church stuff, but really connecting with people who've come at the Dream Center to love on a community and serve people that are in many cases forgotten and abandoned. To watch my kids gravitate towards that and that become normal in their life, all of the difficulties and frustrations and man, it would be a lot easier. All that kind of go away when I see my kids engaging, interacting, and serving. Those are moments where I'm like, okay, Lord, yes, this is uncomfortable for me, and yes, this isn't the kind of ministry dream I had. But watching my kids, there's so much seed being planted in their hearts and engaging with that kind of ministry. It's like, okay, I see.
Yeah,
it's a bigger plan than Justin. So.
No, I love that. I want to just kind of wrap it up a little bit with you. We talked a lot about community and just the thoughts through it. In this podcast, what we try to do is we relate it to health and wellness, and I think community is a big part of your health and wellness.
Amen.
I have 2 questions just to ask you, and
okay.
We'll wrap it up. When you think of like physical health, right? You can Dr. Google a bunch of things, and he'll show you like, hey, how to build your chest bigger.
Right, yeah.
Right. Mental health obviously is coming around, and we're talking more about that, and they generally tell you to go see a therapist or something. Mm-hmm. In the side of like soul or spiritual health, right? I've found that it's been very hard to have those conversations with people that are not religious per se, or maybe they just are, just don't care. And I've been trying to make it more commonplace to just have a deeper conversation, because I feel that your soul health correlates to your physical health. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that through various examples in the clinic and stuff like that. Can you help us get a little bit deeper into our soul health? What is a question or a series of questions? And maybe it relates to community, maybe it doesn't. But what's a question we can ask ourselves that would help us in our journey of soul health and soul health care or spiritual health care?
I think it seems cliche, but it is I mean, for me, it's the ultimate question. It's one that we either are going to defer to greater wisdom than ourselves, or we're going to create it. And even the communities that have been created, many of them have been created because of this very question. And if it's not answered correctly, then you can build communities and an entire life moving in the wrong direction. I think D.L. Moody was the one who said, success isn't a tragedy, but being successful at the wrong thing is, and so, or something like that. I just butchered that quote. Sorry, D.L. Lord bless you. But in essence, it's like, so the question for me is this, and it seems so cliche, but hey, why are you here? Because if you don't answer that question, you are going to answer that question. Somebody's going to fill in the blank. You're either going to answer it, hey, life's useless, it doesn't matter, or I'm here for, blank. I'm here for my kids, or I'm here to make a difference, or I'm here to change the world. I'm here, whatever vague concept you come up with, or maybe a specific concept. And we have entire communities who, because they believe they're here for this, they've rallied around that. We see that in politics all the time. We see a group of people go, we want to fight for this. This is why we're here, to make the world a better place in this specific way. That's a question when it's a deeper question when it comes to our soul, and go, hey, what are we doing here? Why am I here? Why am I built this way? Why is it that I like these things? Why is this all one big cosmic accident, or is there purpose behind it? And if there's purpose behind it, then what is that purpose? Because ultimately, that's going to define what my community looks like. It's going to define what my life looks like. It's going to define what I believe about life and death and what comes afterwards. And I mean, for me, I think those are the things Those are the big questions, and everybody asks that question. We even have to ask ourselves that. Why as humans do we ask that question? I have a dog. He's not contemplating right now why he's here. He's not at home going, why am I? He doesn't care. Like he just, he wants to eat and bark and yell and, do whatever. We as humans are the only animals on the planet, and I use animals loosely because I know that we're created in the image of God, who are contemplating that. Why do I even have the ability to contemplate my own purpose? Why don't I just go and function? Because I believe there's something deeper there, that you're created in the image of God. And so if you're talking about soul care, that's the big question. Because if not, every day is just me attempting to give myself my own purpose. And that can become exhausting. It can become a never-ending rabbit trail that I'm on. And so at some point you have to begin to look beyond yourself and go, wait a second, why am I here? And that's a scary question. And I know people, I've already answered that, but that's the question I would start with if you're really talking, because here's the reality with soul care. If we're just cosmic accidents, then there is no soul. There's no eternal soul.
Right.
There's just you and matter and DNA and whatever, and then when you die, you're done. Like there's no fancy soul. But if we're really talking about, wait a second, we do have a soul. We do have something, and a soul would be considered supernatural. Okay, well, if I have a soul, and I believe that as I take care of that soul, things begin to happen in my body and in my mind, then I have to define, okay, there's something supernatural happening, and then I have to defer to a God. And then, so that is my take, and then that takes you on obviously the journey of, okay, well, who is God? Has he spoken? Has he spoken to me? And what does that look like? So
yeah. The second question is, can you give us like a resource, whether it's we listen to it, we watch it, or we read it, that could benefit us to start our journey of soul care?
I mean, man, maybe that's too easy of an answer for a pastor. I'm sorry. I hate to defer to, I don't hate. I think I would be always going to give us the default answer, and I am. Because when something's true, it just is, right? If you say, what color is the sky, and I say blue, yeah, it might not be exciting. It might not be, but at the end of the day, it's true. So if you're really looking and going, hey, I want, in essence, where do I start my soul care? I would start with the words of Jesus Christ, right? Really look at them, and don't listen to what the local YouTube atheist says. Don't listen to what your friends I mean it. Like don't hop on and go, okay, well that affirms what I believe about Jesus, and really read them for yourself. I encourage people to start in the book of Mark, and hey, if it's not true, like if it's all bunk, like hey, you read one of the greatest works of literature, one of the most longest standing work. I mean, I've never heard anyone, man, I read the words of Jesus, and I don't know, I think I'm a worse person because of it, But if they are true, if Jesus is who he says, then you want a real journey of soul care. You want a real journey. I say follow the one who claims that he can save your soul. So I'd say start in the book of Mark. If you're looking for incredible wisdom, like just practical wisdom, just read the book of Proverbs. Yeah. Like just read it, listen to it. Really listen to it. It's so practical. And it's so good, written over 4,000 years ago, and you're reading it and going, oh man, this is like all the problems we're dealing with today, which is what Solomon said. There's nothing new under the sun. So I know we're here, and in our generation, we're going to bring something new. We're not bringing new revelation. The issue with us is always being reminded of the revelation we've already been given. When God speaks to his people, that's what he does. He's not, I'm going to bring you something new. He's always like, I just need to remind you of what I already said because you forgot and you're going off the reservation. And so, man, I would definitely encourage Proverbs, but I really believe Proverbs absent from the gospel can help you because obviously there's common grace and help there. But the gospel of Jesus Christ, the words of Jesus Christ, what he said about himself, what he said about us, what he said about eternity, those are going to be things that ultimately help you deal with the issues of the soul. And so I can understand your issue of, hey, I'm trying to have these conversations and people just aren't getting it. They're not understanding it. And, and Jesus said that. He said they would have ears but not be able to hear, and they would have eyes not be able to see. So,
ooh, that's good. I want to thank Pastor Justin for his time. I pray and I hope that today, through this conversation, that somebody will say that they are alive and well. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to this episode with Pastor Justin Barnett. If you like this content, please like, subscribe, share it with somebody who could be encouraged by it. We want to be intentional with our actions. And if the community that you're in is not supporting your goals or not aligned with your values, I want you to reflect on that. Think about it. How are you going to step away from it? How are you going to talk about it? How are you going to create change? If you want to connect with Pastor Justin or myself and ask those hard questions or talk about those things, in the show notes, you'll see an email or link to his website. Connect with us. We want to help you. And if you want to connect with my team of healthcare providers so that you can start becoming more intentional about your health and wellness, in the show notes below, you'll see a website. Click that website and schedule a talk with me. And let's see how I can be of assistance to you. And with your intentionality today, you can truly say that you are one step closer to becoming alive and well. Thanks.